Hopi, Navajo, Wallapai, Paiute, Havasupai. These are words of the Western world. These are the words of the world of the Grand Canyon. The world would be flooded and all creation would be destroyed, says an ancient Indian legend. The deluges came and all the earth was covered. When the flood ceased and all the waters rushed away to the sea, they cut through the rocky plateaus and made the deep canyons of the Colorado River. Many Indians of the Grand Canyon region still believe that the river is the runoff from a great flood that once covered the world. I'm Telly Savalas. Let's take a closer look. Over millions of years, erosion has chiseled the rocks into many angular and rounded shapes, each reflecting the light and throwing shadows at its own peculiar angle. Here, unique perspectives mock conventional understanding of distances. Here, terraces of turrets, spires and cupolas, many higher than the highest mountains of the eastern United States, are stark and gaunt, yet their beauty is ethereal. The Grand Canyon's aesthetic wonders are its geologic features, crafted by the meticulous processes of unimaginable time. Its rock stratas go back far beyond recorded history. At the edge of a caramel-colored river stand rocks that were formed 2 billion years ago, when the world was half as old as it is today. Halfway up the cliffs are the fossils of the first form of animal life, and at the edge of the rim, minuscule and representing milliseconds in the span of cosmic time revealed here, stands man. No matter how far you've wandered hitherto, or how many famous gorges and valleys you've seen, this one, the Grand Canyon of the Colorado, will seem as novel to you, as unearthly in the color and grandeur and quality of its architecture, as if you had found it after death on some other star. John Muir, the famous naturalist, eloquently summarized the magnitude of this great rift. Ravens soar between its rims, their cries breaking against the silence of immeasurable time captured within its depths. Cliffs and turrets are awash in waves of color from the ever-changing patterns of light from sunrise to sunset. Bathed in the white light of midday, the walls flatten and lack luster, life, and form. There's only the awareness of stillness and deepness as the canyon seems to sleep in the heat of the sun. Mystery invades the canyon with the advance of evening. Painted with the rays of a setting sun, the form and character of this primeval land communicates all that music and art have striven for thousands of years to express. Somewhere on a plateau, a coyote joins in nocturnal song with the always rushing river below. All life pauses, and as prehistoric man waiting out the long night in canyon wall caves must have done, listens and wonders. The year 1492 marked a turning point in man's history. Reverberations from that great year of discovery would roll over the next 4 centuries and across the New World, touching even this remote and isolated region. Legends had flourished in the Old World, telling of unknown lands and fabulous riches just waiting to be found. Europeans had long sought the fabled Strait of Anian, a northwest passage to the Orient, and it would perhaps be in its discovery that the greatest glory lay. Christopher Columbus, searching for this all-water route in 1492, did not find riches in the New World he stumbled upon, but those who followed in quest of gold, glory, and new territory to claim for Spain uncovered wealth beyond their wildest dreams. To the Spanish conquistadores fell the great Aztec, Mayan, and Incan empires that held the knowledge of astronomy and a calendar, builders of temples atop pyramids, and practitioners of human sacrifice in terrible, intense ceremonies. Were there not possibilities of even greater wealth to the north? In 1540, Don Francisco de Coronado and a company of several hundred soldiers rode forth for Mexico, called New Spain, in search of the 7 cities of Cibola, an Indian kingdom rumored to be rich in gold and jewels. In the province of Tusayan, the land of the Hopi Indians, they learned of a great river and chasm lying to the west. Captain Garcia Lopez de Cardenas and a small number of soldiers were dispatched to investigate. 20 days later, they arrived at the edge of the South Rim, the first white men to gaze upon the Grand Canyon. The canyon was regarded as the final obstacle to a fruitless quest, and the company returned to Mexico. By the early 1800s, the Spanish Empire was on the decline. The fabled golden cities had turned into mud huts, and the dreams of glory and riches were as faded as the brilliance of the Spanish crown. Spain lost its western colonies to Mexico in 1822, and in 1846, at the end of the Mexican-American War, the Grand Canyon was ceded to the United States. In the days of imperial Spain, the church, in its quest for the salvation of souls, accompanied the conquistadores on their journeys of exploration. Christianity and other facets of European life were introduced to the Native Americans. The influx of European cultures that began with the Spanish shattered the Indians' culture, but it brought them over a threshold, out of the mists of prehistory into the realm of recorded time. The walls and plateaus of the Grand Canyon hold the story of the prehistoric people of the Southwest. Over 2,500 ruins and archaeological sites have been located within Grand Canyon National Park. Tusayan Ruin, built between 1185 and 1200 AD, and named after the old Spanish province in which it was found, mirrors the canyon's rich cultural history. Walls 1 and 2 stories high were constructed of unshaped limestone boulders set in clay mortar. The walls formed a broad U-shape, protecting a court or plaza which was open to the sunlight. The pueblo was inhabited by 25 or 30 people. By 1225 AD, this and all other pueblos of the area were abandoned. The Tusayan Museum serves as a key to the ruin, providing a chronological story of human history and development in the Southwest. Anasazi, the ancient ones, the Navajo people named them. The earliest Anasazi were the basket maker groups, so named because their baskets were of extremely high quality, made from the leaf fibers of the yucca plant. Some were so tightly woven that they're still waterproof. Their remains, found mostly in caves, date back almost 2,000 years. They were originally hunters and gatherers. Their sustenance was berries and nuts and the wild game of the land. A community-oriented way of life evolved with the practice of agriculture. The small crops of maize required care, and more permanent villages of partly subterranean houses were built. The bow and arrow added to the skill of the hunter. Food was prepared and stored for times of hardship and hunger. Throughout the centuries of planting and harvesting seasons, a settled and civilized society developed. The highest level of culture in North America was reached by the Anasazi. Then, suddenly and inexplicably, they abandoned their homes and lands. Anthropologists can only speculate as to their fate. Sensing the power of nature captured in this jagged land, the Indians wove it into their myths and religions. Almost 4,000 years ago, ancient man sought out remote caves in the Redwall limestone cliffs and placed his split-twig animal figurines in the darkest recesses of the earth, practicing his sympathetic magic to ensure a successful hunt. Kivas, partly subterranean rooms, were used primarily for religious purposes. In the floor is an orifice called the Sipapu, which symbolizes the place of emergence from the underworld to this world. Similar kivas are used by the Hopi. Some still believe that after death, the spirit re-enters the Sipapu and returns to the land of the dead, which lies beneath the Grand Canyon. Nature was the altar of spiritual devotions. Legends explain the origin of all things, and poetic myths were ideas, expressed with beauty and power, and passed from generation to generation by tribal storytellers and medicine men. They enabled the people to cope with a harsh environment and made comprehensible the forces of their unique world. A recurring theme through the mythology was the awesome and powerful presence of the river, the big water deep down in earth, that seemed to have no beginning and no end, and led to the underworld, home of the gods. Water had life, and springs had souls, and were placated with ceremonious offerings. Water in this moisture-starved land is the core of existence. Here, where the blue-green waters of Havasu Creek plunge over waterfalls to become still in pools of turquoise, is the home of the Havasupai, people of the blue-green water. Their 2.5 mile long oasis is the only reservation found within the boundaries of a national park. They're a peaceful nation whose people say they have never killed a white man. Since they were never at war with the United States, the Havasupai Indian Reservation was established in 1882 by executive order rather than by treaty. The Havasupai were driven from their homes on the plateau by raiding Indians in the 12th century. The small population, never numbering more than 300, found refuge on the canyon floor 3,000 feet below the walls of red sandstone. The Havasupai's interest is centered in his fields of cultivated crops and small herds of cattle. Principal crops are corn, squash, beans, melons, and fruit. Intertribal trade is carried on with the Navajo, Hopi, and Wallapais. Vegetables, fruit, and dressed hides are exchanged for blankets, wool, and silverwork. Twin rocks stand atop a weather-eroded cliff. They are supernatural beings, say the Havasupai, watching over the tribe and guarding their destiny. Should they ever fall, and someday they must, the village and the entire Havasupai people will cease to exist.
こちらがね、ハバスパイロッジのジェームスさんです。
あ、そうです。はい、ジェームス。
We came from Japan and she riding motorcycle around the places. So, yeah, thank you. Yeah. This
lady just came back from Death Valley where she rode a motorcycle, a dirt bike in Death Valley. So James, I thought we'd take her for a horseback ride down to the waterfalls.
You're most welcome here, and we welcome you. It's a pleasure to meet you.
Yeah,
And what we will
thank
do though is we'll go outside for the horses.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Follow me. We'll go ahead. Okay, good.
また馬に乗
We'll
れ
go
る。
ahead and get you onto the horse first, okay? So if you will come on, we'll go ahead and get you.
Yes. おとなしい馬？この馬。
Okay, now what you're going to have to do is go ahead and put your
Yes.
foot onto this and then go ahead and go on over.
よいしょ。あ、ちょうどいいかな？かな。あっとねえねえど。平気かな。犬がついてくる。じゃれ合っちゃってか。
Dogs are in good form today, playing here.
Yes.
I've never seen so many dogs here before.
あ、そう？
The most I've ever seen.
どうしたんだろうこの犬は。どっから湧いてきたのかな。喧嘩してるのかな。
Albert, which waterfall is this one?
あ、本当に？
Does this have a name?
ポー？
No name.
No name。どこ？Where is the port?
Waterfall is coming up right here.
あ
That's the first one, but it's very small. It doesn't even have a name.
あ、あ、本当だ。あ、それだ。おお。あ、すごい深い。こっちが落っこちそうになって。ここもまた深そうだな。あーここに木の根っこがあるよ。木の根っこがあるよ。あ、渡れそう。渡れそうだけど。よしよし、いい子だいい子だ。頑張ったね。うわー、楽しみ。どうだろう。音は聞こえど姿は見えぬって感じだけど、あれ真っ青な水ですよ。あ、本当だ、すごい。あ、見えます、すごいですよ。あ、水がね、真っ青なの。あ、きれいね。
Get off the horses here, and we'll walk down this trail and take a closer look at the waterfall. Oh,
え、
come on.
この水の裏ぶったったのないですか？
This water came from the Flagstaff also.
So all of the water that comes into Supai, they say originates from Flagstaff, comes out the opening to the Supai canyon.
To the east of the Grand Canyon, atop 3 barren sunburned mesas, live the Pueblo people who call themselves Hopi, the peaceful people. The lands and villages, once described as autonomous as Greek city-states, are highly organized under the clan system. Hopi are a conservative and extremely religious people. Contact with the Spanish conquistadores and missionaries, and later the reservation system, has had little effect on the political and religious spheres of their life. They are perhaps the most representative pre-contact cultural entity surviving in the United States today. The Hopi have occupied these mesas for centuries. Oraibi is the oldest continuously inhabited town in North America, dating from at least 1100 to 1200 AD. When Coronado's emissary, Pedro de Tovar, came to the region in 1540, Oraibi was the only village on the mesa top. One of the pueblos on the valley floor was attacked and defeated by de Tovar and his conquistadores, and the Hopi submitted to Spanish rule. In 1680, the repressive yoke of Spanish authority was thrown off. A guard against further interference developed. The other villages were moved to the mesa tops for better protection, and the Hopi people withdrew into an even more closely knit social order, with greater secrecy for the preservation of their religious beliefs and cultural values. The Hopi Reservation is surrounded by the Navajo Reservation. It is the nation's largest, encompassing nearly 24,000 square miles, some of which reaches into Utah and New Mexico. Its population numbers nearly 100,000. The Navajos, who swept down from Western Canada between 1000 and 1400 AD, raiding settlements along the way, settled down and copied the Hopi agricultural pursuits. Their dwellings, or hogans, are constructed of logs and mud and blend well into the natural setting. In the 1600s, they acquired horses and sheep from the Spaniards, as well as the knowledge of working with metal and wool. They are semi-nomadic, moving with sheep and goats from winter to summer homes and doing some farming. Both Navajo and Hopi produce arts and crafts that rank for the most highly perfected and richest of the North American tribes. Colorful rugs and blankets are produced by both tribes. However, in Hopi society, men do the weaving. In the midst of a civilization whose mechanical ingenuity is unparalleled in history, the loom and the hand-weaving technique have remained unchanged since about the 17th century. Hopi basket weaving is a technology that has remained virtually unchanged for the last 7,000 years. The three distinct methods of construction, wicker, coiling, and plating, that characterize the craft today are shown in the oldest existing baskets found preserved at archaeological sites. Sterling silver jewelry is perhaps one of the most distinctive forms of craft work. Jewelry crafted by the Navajo is usually massive and set with turquoise. Hopi overlay silver with its abstract art form appears to be of a modern design, but actually predates the South American Columbian era, which reached its peak around the 12th century AD. Sometime around 600 to 800 AD, during the period called Basket Maker III, the Indians learned how to make and fire true pottery. Since the potter's wheel was unknown in the prehistoric New World, all the work was carried out by hand. clay vessels were usually started in a basket. Rolls of clay were coiled around, each coil being made to adhere to the one beneath. The ball was usually then scraped to a smooth surface. When the clay dried, the vessel was sometimes painted with a simple design in black organic paint. It was then fired in a wood fire. The result was usually some shade of gray, and occasionally a reddish color was produced. By 1300 AD, the ceramic art changed to its present form. The land is the soul of the Navajo. Religion and traditions are based on the land. Harvest time, the end of another growing season, is a celebration, a song of life. The people mingle in pageantry and praise of traditional Indian values. A sacred ceremonial dance is performed as a reminder of religious values. In an atmosphere of competition and camaraderie, tribes share in their skills and art and enjoy. As sandal feet beat the bare earth, a haunting chant rises against the throb of an age-old rhythm. Corn is the mother of the Hopi, say the Hopi Indians. Moenkopi, place of running water, is the only village with irrigated fields. In this arid climate, there is felt an urgent need for supernatural assistance. Elaborate, complex ceremonials are performed throughout the year. The Kachina Society forms half the ceremonial life of the Hopi. Kachinas are considered to be divine beings who act as intermediaries between man and God. In ceremonials, Hopi men who have been trained and initiated put on masks and dance in solemn ritual to personify the Kachinas. Through them, the people pray for rain, crops, and fertility. The men who impersonate Kachinas in the dances carve small wooden replicas of their Kachina appearance. They're not toys, but are valued possessions, for the effigy is considered to bear a portion of the Kachina spirit's power. The dolls are given to the children of the village during the ceremonies. Through these dolls, they learn the meaning and symbolism of their ancestral gods. There are about 250 different Kachinas. Each has its own name, dance steps, songs, and holy decorations. The mask is the most important, for it identifies the original personage. The Hopi consider the mask to be vested with power and spirit. When the Hopi dancers wear the masks, the spirits virtually become part of them, and they are the Kachinas. Hopi legends, myths, and customs are reflected in some Kachina details. Objects in the hands indicate the Kachina's role, who he is, and what he does. The snake in Hopi legend is a descendant from a tribal ancestor who journeyed by way of the river to the underworld home of the gods. There he met the snake people, one of whose maidens he married. Upon his return to the village, his snake wife and snake children were driven out by fellow villagers who feared their bite. This action offended the gods, and they sent a drought that the Hopi could lift only by welcoming snakes back into the villages. The snake ceremony is believed to be one of the most ancient of Pueblo rituals. Live rattlesnakes, who represent lightning, are carried in the hands and in the mouths of the dancers. They're then released to carry the prayers of the priests to the gods, to send rain upon the parched land. The eerie light cast over the land when a storm approaches creates a study in light and shadow, of contour and contrast. Thunder reverberates in the canyon and seems captured there in perpetuity, like the sound of the ocean in the seashell. Rain releases the perfumes of the dry land, filling the air with the smell of water, the aroma of dampened dust, and 1,000 other fragrances of nature when raindrops fall. The Kaibab, a Paiute Indian word meaning mountain lying down, is a vast plateau, some 50 miles long and 35 miles wide. It rises 5,000 feet above the White Plains to the north and west, and is isolated on the south and east by the Grand Canyon. Dense stands of tall spruces, pines, and firs are encouraged by the heavy snowfall and make up much of the forest cover of the Kaibab Plateau. In the foreground of every North Rim view are striking architectural forms that are viewed only distantly from South Rim overlooks. Due to difference in erosion patterns, the North Rim differs distinctly from the contours of the South Rim. The sloping plateau causes surface water from melting snow and rain to eat away the canyon walls. Over the eons, running water has carved narrow promontories that intrude into the canyon. An array of freestanding spires, towers, and mesas thrust up from deep ravines. Few regions on Earth exhibit a more complicated topography within so comparatively small an area. In the quiet mood of winter on the South Rim, the canyon is vast, stark, raw, unnatural, and unending. The cold wind coils and whispers around the stone formations as the canyon puts on its mask of white. Among its caprices are clouds that clothe it in billows, allowing the canyon to masquerade as an ethereal thing. The canyon is a unique museum of living forms. The beauty and diversity of more than 1,500 species of plants and flowers, with their enormous interlinked complexity of life and climate, is almost equal to that of the natural range of the entire continent. From the forests of the North Rim to the river level where desert cacti flourish, are 4 of the 7 life zones into which all plant life is divided. These biotic zones, determined by the conditions of altitude, soil, and moisture, the amount of exposure to sun and wind, are similar to those found from central Canada to central Mexico. The temperature on the North Rim averages 35 degrees colder than that at the bottom of the canyon. Flowers bloom in the dry heat below, while there may be 12 inches of snow on the rim. Snow almost never reaches the canyon floor. It melts and evaporates on the way down. Within the dry, eroding landscape, springs and streams provide garden-like havens. On the great plateau called the Tonto Platform, Indian Gardens holds the miraculous green of cottonwoods and their shade. The spring, which waters the trees, was used by the Indians to irrigate their crops. Over 400 vertebrate species of animal life, birds, mammals, amphibians, and reptiles are known to occupy the environs of the canyon. The diversification of wildlife in the park is due not only to the differences in elevation, but also the barrier created by the river and the canyon itself. The most striking example is the kaibeb squirrel, one of the rarest squirrels in the Western Hemisphere, for he lives nowhere else. For thousands of years, he's been restricted to the island plateau and has developed physical characteristics apart from the closely related Abert squirrel. In 1932, an estimate calculated that there were only 120 kaibeb squirrels living on the North Rim. The squirrels are now on the United States Endangered Species list. The unique pink rattlesnake, varying in color from pale salmon to vermilion, is found only in the Grand Canyon. Its color may be an evolutionary change, an adaptation to the red rock among which it lives. Now we have canyon gorges and deep eroded valleys, and still the hills are disappearing. The geologist makes prophecy of a time when this desolate land of titanic rocks shall become a valley of many valleys. Yet again the sea will invade the land, and the coral animals build their reefs, wrote explorer Major John Wesley Powell. Water is the greatest force at work on the canyon. Water seeps into the crevices of stone and alternately freeze and thaw. Cracks appear and eventually the rock splits. Alternate expansion in the sun's heat and contraction in the cool night air help crumble the stone. Gravitation continues to work on the walls incessantly. Water and rainstorms sweep tons of material toward the river and on to sea. It is by such ordinary processes of nature that the great size of the canyon is accounted for. The layers of shale, limestone, and sandstone that make up the strata of the canyon walls are called formations. Each has certain characteristics which distinguish it from those above and below. Their story is the depositing of layer upon layer of sediments by water and wind, of mountain building and the tearing down of mountains. The work is done with the infinite laziness of nature, without haste, without rest. Descending into the canyon's depths, time falls away until 1 vertical mile down on the dark, somber wall of the inner gorge, the earth reveals her geologic soul. Here in the Vishnu schist is antiquity, 2 billion years back, a time more ancient than man can conceive. The oldest rocks found in the V-shaped granite gorge were originally sediments, deposited by a sea and then uplifted into mountains. The great forces of pressure and high temperatures changed the sedimentary rocks into metamorphic types called gneiss and schist. The older rocks subsided and were again covered by a shallow sea. Plant fossils of algae and fungi, evidence of early forms of life, were captured. Block faulting and uplifting formed mountains that were eroded away until only the remnants remained. The second major era of the Earth's history is the era of ancient life. It began about 570 million years ago and spans approximately 345 million years. Layers of sandstone, shale, and limestone were formed by the deposits of an advancing sea. This period saw a never-to-be-repeated wealth of life forms in the world's oceans. Within these 3 rock layers are traces of invertebrates, trilobites, crustaceans, and brachiopods, the beginning of life on Earth. Here in this 30-foot layer of limestone is the age of fishes, the beginning of the first creatures with backbones. One of the most prominent cliff walls in the canyon is the Red Wall limestone. It was formed by the remnants of marine life in the sea. Its true color is gray. The red coloring is a surface stain from the overlying rock layers. In a climate that was becoming relatively arid, the Grand Canyon remained in a marine environment. River sediment sandstones, containing the imprints of ferns and fossilized amphibian tracks, is overlaid by hermit shale, and then the vertical cliff of Coconino sandstone, sand deposited when the region became a desert. Seas twice again inundated the land. Their residue created the Toro Weep and the Kaibeb formations. In the 100 million year long Mesozoic era, the Grand Canyon area experienced many environments: deserts, seas, and swamps. This was the age of dinosaurs, the era of flying reptiles. Erosion has removed much of the rock of the Mesozoic era. Cedar Mountain is a prominent remnant of Mesozoic rock. The present major division of geologic time, the Cenozoic era, began about 65 million years ago. A large section of the southwest was elevated high above sea level, and the Colorado River began carving the Grand Canyon. The size, the age would seem enough. But nature has yet another paradox to offer the bewildered visitor who is struggling to understand the vista. The turbid Colorado River, the engineer of this colossal enterprise of nature, is flowing into and cutting through a mountain instead of down one, or so it seems. Glimpsed between an avenue of vertical cliffs deep enough to conceal the Empire State Building, it travels 1,450 miles from its source in the Rocky Mountains to the Gulf of California. Until recently, it carried an average of 500,000 tons of sand and silt a day, as much as a 10-ton truck passing every second. However, its work goes more slowly now that dams have impounded its waters. These cutting tools deepen the gorge still further, cutting downward at the estimated rate of 1,000 feet every 2 million years. And so, with wind and water, rock and river, the incredible epic of erosion continues. The Colorado and all these canyons unite to form one Grand Canyon, the most sublime spectacle on Earth. 277 miles in length, 600 feet to 18 miles wide, and a mile deep. The first explorations of the region by white men after the Spanish were made by mountain men and trappers in the 1800s. The discovery of gold provided the impetus for increased travel across the Southwest. Expeditions of military men were dispatched to map and secure new routes. In 1857, Lieutenant Joseph Christmas Ives led the first official survey partway up the river. Unable to continue on their course, he appraised the region as altogether valueless. He wrote, "Ours has been the first and will doubtless be the last party of whites to visit this profitless locality. It seems intended by nature that the Colorado River, along the greater portion of its lonely and majestic way, shall be forever unvisited and undisturbed." Unvisited and undisturbed? 12 years later, The river was not only visited, but was also navigated. Major John Wesley Powell, a small bearded man who had lost his right arm in the battle at Shiloh, was the first to conquer the Colorado River, leading his expeditions through the canyons of the Grand, Green, and Colorado Rivers in 1869 and 1871. Even the Indians warned Powell not to undertake this venture. They feared the impiety of trying to pass through the precipitous cliffs on its silt-choked river. Stories of lethal whirlpools, of swirling rapids, and of the river sinking underground to emerge hundreds of miles away abounded about this uncharted land. But on May 24, 1869, the boats shoved off to explore the grand, gloomy depths of the river canyons. 13 weeks after beginning their trip down the Great Unknown, Powell and his remaining crew of 5 men emerged from their granite prison. And so, the canyon secrets were revealed to the world. Miners came to the canyon, anxious to probe its walls for hidden wealth. And with them, the sightseers, curious to view the rumored wonders. This was the beginning of the center, now known as Grand Canyon Village. Fred Harvey Company, concessionaire to the Santa Fe Railway, brought luxury accommodations to the Rim in 1905. The El Tovar Hotel was described as the most unique, comfortable, and costliest in the Southwest. Each guest room had a telephone, and prices started at $4 a day. Hopi House, modeled after parts of the village of Oribe, had a lasting effect on park architecture. It was constructed as part of the Fred Harvey Company's attempt to revive Southwest Indian arts and crafts. Hopis lived here and produced craftwork as visitors watched. The first curio shop for visitors was opened in a tent on the grounds of Bright Angel Lodge in 1898 by John Verkamp. In 1905, Verkamp's Curios was constructed at its present location. Hermit's Rest, located at the end of West Rim Drive, is a unique log and stone structure. Its architectural style harmonizes with the natural environment. The watchtower at Desert View is a distinctive architectural feature. It was constructed in 1932 of native stone, steel, and concrete, and is a replica of an early Indian observation post. The upper floor of the 67-foot-high tower commands a sweeping view of the canyon. Proposals to protect the Grand Canyon as a national scenic heritage were advanced by Indiana Senator Benjamin Harrison in 1882. His bill to make the canyon a national park was defeated by mining interests, but the canyon triumphed. In 1919, under President Wilson, an act of Congress established the Grand Canyon a national park and placed it under the protection and administration of the National Park Service. At the Visitor Center, park rangers provide information and orientation. Among the many services offered are exhibits, naturalist hikes, and programs. Today, although it is the most popular park of all, the National Park Service carries out its dual mission of protecting the canyon while making it available to all who come to see it. Interpretive services assume an increasingly vital role as visitation increases, offering a critical link to promote the delicate dynamic balance between the park's inherent resources and the people using them. The Grand Canyon Natural History Association was founded in 1932 to further visitor enjoyment and understanding of the values of the park. It is an educational, non-profit organization dedicated to the interpretation of the natural and human history of the park. Supporting the program of the National Park Service, the association serves visitors through the publication and sale of interpretive literature. It also aids the National Park Service with continuing financial support of educational and research activities. The hiker, lifting his home onto his shoulders, placing one foot ahead of the other, begins his journey of discovery. The Kaibeb Trail starts at Yaqui Point and winds its way down the south wall of the canyon to Phantom Ranch. It was blasted out of solid rock and was engineered so that sunshine would keep it free from winter snows. At the top of Bright Angel Trail, the adventurer can ride down the steep zigzag path by mule. Not dangerous, but terrifying. There are often only inches between the rider and a sheer drop of hundreds of feet. But the sure-footed mule is very wise in all that is required to negotiate safely and with a minimum of trouble to himself, the vertical descent. The trail follows the Bright Angel geological fault and is perhaps the oldest trail in the canyon. It was used by bighorn sheep and then, for centuries, by the Havasupai Indians to reach their primitive farms before the coming of the white man. The Kaibeb Suspension Bridge near the end of Bright Angel Trail is the only means of crossing the river. During construction, the long steel cables were carried down the switchback trail like snakes slung over the shoulders of men. The trail ends at Phantom Ranch on the canyon's floor. Accommodations were first built in 1903. It was named Roosevelt's Camp in 1913 in honor of President Theodore Roosevelt's visit, then was renamed because of its proximity to Phantom Creek. Since 1869, the challenge that rates highest in the drama of exploration is the river. Today, the water that has been described as too thick to drink, too thin to plow, is a pale reflection of the wild, undammed river that awed explorers. But today's travelers upon its waters may still relive in imagination the experiences of the little party of battered men fighting for their lives under the leadership of Major Powell. We are now ready to start on our way down the great unknown. We are 3/4 of a mile in the depths of the earth, and the great river shrinks into insignificance as it dashes its angry waves against the walls and cliffs that rise to the world above. We have an unknown distance yet to run, an unknown river to explore. What falls there are, we know not. What rocks beset the channel, we know not. What walls rise over the river, we know not. With some eagerness, and some anxiety, and some misgiving, we enter the canyon below and are carried along by the swift water through walls which rise from its very edge. Rations are spoiling. We must make all haste possible. We come to a place in the river where it seems much worse than any we have yet met in all its course. To run it would be sure destruction. The river is very deep, the canyon very narrow. The waters wheel and roll and boil. The boats are entirely unmanageable. One is capsized. The men are thrown out, but they cling to the boat. She is soon bailed out, and the men are aboard once more. The wind twists around the hulking presence of the steep cliffs and the strange rock formations in a stone wilderness, creating the sounds of nature as primal man must have heard them. Our national parks are museums of natural phenomena and beauty. They are a composite of great silences, timelessness, remoteness, and far horizons. In them, all humanity may rediscover their ancient ties to the earth and the inherent sense of being at one with all life. Grand Canyon, as do all our national parks, preserves not only the finest scenic and natural treasures of our country, but also the record of human discovery and occupancy. This constitutes our richest American heritage.